Pope Pius XII had the difficult situation of governing the Church during the Second World War. The Second World War having been preceded by the rise to power of the Nazis in Germany with the terrible, ferocious, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish laws. When the war broke out, we must remember that Italy was an ally of Germany. When the war broke out, those anti-Jewish laws began to be applied also in Italy. Pope Pius XII in the Vatican in Castel Gandolfo and in so many convents, parishes, not only in Rome but in many Italian cities, it is famous the case of Assisi, ordered to welcome the Jews to prevent them from being deported to the concentration camps. An Israeli diplomat, Pinchas Lapid, said that thanks to Pius XII, 700,000 Jews had been saved from the Holocaust. At the death of Pius XII in 1958, personalities of the Jewish world as emblematic as Golda Meir or Einstein were overflowing in praises on the Pope, and even the chief rabbi of Rome, impressed by the charity of the pontiff towards his people, converted to Catholicism. He was baptized. However, a few years after his death, a play, The Vicar, was premiered in which all kinds of accusations were hurled against the deceased pontiff. Those accusations, that play was written with false data provided by the Soviet KGB. Do not forget that during the Italian elections after the war, Pope Pius XII had condemned with excommunication those who voted for the Communist Party. The Communists would never forgive him and began a campaign of discredit against him. The basis or the main accusation against Pius XII, which was unfortunately taken up even by the Israeli state, which had previously praised him, was his silence in the face of the Holocaust. The Holocaust caused millions of victims. Pius XII was aware of the existence of the Holocaust but kept silent, while in the Vatican and in the Italian convents, and not only in Italy, but by order of the Pope, the Jews were protected. The Pope kept silent about the Holocaust. Some historians say that he was very impressed by what had happened in Holland, in the Netherlands. The war started in 1939, and a few months later, in 1940, the Germans, the Nazis, violated the neutrality of Holland and Belgium and conquered in a few days those two countries. Holland was conquered in 5 days, and immediately the anti-Semitic laws were applied there, and they began to deport to the concentration camps the Jews that were in that country, that were many because they had not fled as they had fled previously from Germany. The Dutch bishops, the Catholic bishops, protested against these deportations of Jews, and the consequence was that the few Jewish Catholics who existed in the country were also victims of the deportations, among them the future Saint Edith Stein, Saint Therese Benedicta German, who was a refugee in a Carmelite convent in Holland. Pope Pius XII knew it and was afraid that his public intervention against the Holocaust, against the Nazis, would mean the end of that supposed neutrality, which was not real, that protected the Jews. He was afraid that those 700,000 who were being protected from the slaughter would also suffer the same fate as the others who had not been able to find refuge in the buildings, temples of the church. Was Pius XII right to remain silent? Should he have spoken out, putting at risk the lives of many of those people? Even today, there are still many who have not forgiven him for his silence. I remembered this story because of what is happening in several countries, especially in Nicaragua, but not only Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, and many others. In Nicaragua, the communist regime, the communist dictatorship of Ortega, is openly confronted with the Catholic Church. It is the only voice that dares to dissent. We must not forget that in the last elections, practically all the opposition candidates were put in jail by the communist tyrant so that there would be no real opposition possible. He has closed many of the Catholic radio stations. They have been seized. They are closed, and at this moment, he is keeping a bishop, the Bishop of Matagalpa, and several priests under house arrest without being able to leave. Images have gone around the world of this bishop in the street on his knees with his arms to the sky, surrounded by police, and who dares to go out with the Blessed Sacrament to break the blockade to which he was subjected, because they even prevented him from even celebrating Mass with the people. And in fact, he has to celebrate Mass in his chapel with those few priests who are with him. Pope Francis is being criticized a lot, some of course because he keeps silent. He was also silent when the Vatican nuncio in Nicaragua was expelled from the country a few months ago. He also kept silent in the case of Venezuela, but not in the same way. That was different. There were interventions, but there was not explicit, open, strong condemnation against the tyrannical regime of Maduro in Venezuela. Are we facing a new Pius XII case with the doubt between choosing that of Pius XII between a wrong not condemning the Holocaust and the possible death of 700,000 people? Are we facing a similar case? It's true that the Pope has spoken. Concretely, there is a recent case, from my point of view, unfortunate, when he said in an interview that he had a personal relationship with Raul Castro. Well, Fidel Castro's brother and one of the list of Cuban dictators. It's an ambiguous statement because every relationship between people is personal. Even a relationship of hate is a personal relationship. It is taken for granted that he was talking about a friendly relationship, although he didn't say it explicitly. He was talking about a personal relationship. What would have happened if, for example, St. John Paul II had said that he had a personal relationship with Pinochet, which he didn't? He was on the balcony of the government house in Santiago de Chile when he visited that country accompanied by Pinochet, but up to that point there was no kind of declaration of friendship. But what would have happened if it had happened? They would have eaten him alive. Literally, the attacks would have been fierce. Many have been hurt by those statements of the Pope about his relationship with Raul Castro. Many Catholics have been hurt. I think they were unnecessary statements. But does the Pope's silence mean that he is supporting the communist dictatorship in Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba? Can it really be said that his silence is a form of support for communism? I repeat, we must look at the background and we must be very prudent when judging. Do we have all the facts in hand? Do we know if the Pope, the Vatican have consulted on what should be done, if a public statement of condemnation should be made? Do we know it? Do we know if the Venezuelan Episcopal Conference was consulted? The Venezuelan bishops have been extraordinarily courageous in confronting the corrupt, dictatorial regime of Maduro in Venezuela. They have been exemplary. Were they consulted on whether that was enough, or if they wanted an explicit support from the Pope condemning the regime? Do we know what the Nicaraguan priests think for example? That if there were that condemnation, I repeat the case of Pius XII in the Holocaust, many of them could be executed. And I'm not saying because the police would arrive and shoot them, but because common criminals would arrive, which is the paramilitary arm of these murderous governments, and saying that it is a robbery to steal, they would kill a good handful of them. Do we know what they think? It's very risky to judge without having all the facts in the hand. I'm not saying with this that the position of the Vatican with their silence is the correct one. I don't know. It's possible that I'm wrong, but what I do know is that when there are such complex decisions, above all decisions that can involve the lives of thousands of people, it's not convenient to rush and judge lightly, and above all, it is very easy to demand resounding condemnations and disqualifications when you are not a victim or you cannot be a victim. That is to say, when you are comfortably installed outside the country, living well without fear of anything happening to you, and you demand that someone raises their voice, and if there are consequences to be paid, those who are inside and those who are having a bad time are the ones who will pay them. I insist, I don't know if silence is the right thing to do. I do not know, but I do know that we must be very prudent, that we must not judge lightly, and that history teaches us that sometimes important decisions are always ambiguous, and that if you take one will be seen as wrong by some, and if you take the other you will be seen as wrong by others. Was Pius XII wrong not to condemn the Holocaust if that would have meant the death of 700,000 people? Was he wrong? He's condemned because he kept silent, certainly, but he saved 700,000 people. If we had been in his place, what would we have done? Would we have said, from the comfort of the fact that nothing happened to us, would we have said, the Holocaust is an awful genocide, 700,000 more people to the gas chambers? Would we have said it? Let us be very prudent and very respectful with the conscience of others. I insist, without saying what is happening is right or what is happening is wrong. I do not dare to say it. I do dare to ask for prayers for the people of Nicaragua, who are suffering a terrible dictatorship, as well as the people of Venezuela and the people of Cuba and others. Let us ask for prayers for those countries that are mortified by communism, and let us ask for prayers for the Holy Father, that he may be right in everything, and that he may keep silence when he has to keep silence, and that the Holy Spirit may inspire him, and that he may obey so that he may speak when he has to speak. Until next week, God willing.